All right, today we're going to get into something that sounds kind of dry, but is actually the secret sauce to the US Army's power, its organizational DNA. We're talking about the master blueprints, the documents that spell out exactly how every single unit is supposed to be built, who's in it, and what gear they get. And trust me, this isn't just boring paperwork. This system is what makes sure the Army can actually do its job. So think about this for a second. How on earth does an organization as huge and complicated as the US Army keep everything straight? I mean, how do you make sure that an infantry platoon in one part of the world and a giant medical center in another both have exactly the right people and the right equipment they need to function? That's the core question we're tackling. Well, the answer really comes down to a system of three crucial documents. You can think of these as the official blueprints that Army leaders rely on to build, manage, and basically run the entire force. And these three are the TOE, the MTOE, and the TDA. Okay, so this table here is basically our cheat sheet for the whole conversation. You've got the TOE, which is like the generic, perfect world blueprint for a unit. Then there's the MTOE, which is the actual authorized blueprint for a specific unit. And finally, the TDA, which handles all the support units, the ones that aren't necessarily deploying to war zone. We're going to go through each one, but let's start at the top with the foundation, the TOE. All right, let's kick things off with the TOE. That stands for Table of Organization and Equipment. You really have to think of this as the absolute starting point. It's the pure theoretical idea of what a unit needs to look like to do its job in a wartime scenario. So looking at the official definition, there's a phrase that's absolutely critical: minimum wartime requirements. See, the TOE doesn't care about peacetime budgets. It doesn't care what's available in the supply depot right now. Its only job is to lay out, based on Army doctrine, exactly what a unit needs, the bare minimum, to accomplish its mission in combat. And this is a super important distinction to make. A TOE is purely a requirements document. It is not an authorization document. It's just a model, a template. There's no unit out there that is a TOE. It's just that perfect, ideal blueprint that exists on paper before all the real-world stuff like budgets, where the unit is located, or its specific mission gets factored in. So you might be asking, why even have this theoretical document if it's not real? Well, it's all about standardization. The whole point of the TOE system is to create a common model. That way, an infantry battalion in Europe is built on the same fundamental principles as one stationed in the Pacific. It becomes the bedrock for everything else: how you plan for new gear, how you develop training, and even how you measure if a unit is ready to go. Okay, so we've got the ideal blueprint. Now let's talk about how that gets turned into reality. This is where the MTOE comes in. The MTOE, or Modified Table of Organization and Equipment. If the TOE is the blueprint, the MTOE is the actual physical building. It's the document that governs a real unit out in the real world. This right here, this is probably the most important slide to understand. A TOE, like we said, just states a requirement. But an MTOE, it grants an authorization. That's a huge difference. The TOE is generic, but the MTOE is tied to one specific unit, and that's done using what's called a UIC, or Unit Identification Code. The MTOE takes that perfect TOE blueprint and then changes it, modifies it, based on that specific unit's mission, its location, and what people and gear are actually available. The MTOE is the what it legally is. And that word legal is key. I mean, listen to this quote. Without this approved general order document, no unit in the force can be activated or organized, and absolutely no personnel or equipment authorizations are in effect. That is serious. The MTOE is literally the document that makes a unit real. Without it, a unit doesn't officially exist. You can't get soldiers assigned to it, you can't get equipment for it. It's basically a unit's birth certificate and its legal charter all rolled into one. Okay, I know this chart looks a little intense, but don't worry about all the boxes. The main takeaway is actually pretty simple. It's showing the process, the journey, from the concept world over on the left, that's the TOE, all the way over to the right, where you have a real, documented, authorized unit. And that thing on the right, that's the MTOE. It's the end product of this whole process. All right, so everything we've talked about so far, the TOE and the MTOE, that's really focused on the units that are designed to deploy and fight. But what about everybody else? What about the hospitals, the recruiting stations, the training centers, all the headquarters staff? That's where our third and final document comes into play, the TDA. TDA stands for Table of Distribution and Allowances. And the key thing to know from the official definition is that this is for units that don't have a standard cookie-cutter wartime mission. Instead, these organizations are built around a specific function or workload. And just like an MTOE, a TDA is an authorization document. It makes the unit official. And here are some great examples of what we're talking about. These TDA units are really the institutional backbone of the Army. A big difference from MTOE units is that they're usually non-deployable. They're also where you'll find a mix of military and civilian personnel. So we're talking about places like Army hospitals, ROTC programs at universities, recruiting commands, and yeah, even the big headquarters staffs. All of them are organized and run based on a TDA. Okay, so we've gone through the what. TOE, MTO, TDA. Now for the most important part, the so what. Why does any of this paperwork matter to a soldier, to a leader who's actually on the ground dealing with real-world problems? Let's put it this way. If you're a sergeant trying to account for your team and all their gear, or you're a commander who has to sign for millions of dollars of equipment, why should you care about this stuff? The short answer is because it affects literally everything you do. So here's how that accountability flows. It all starts with the MTOE. Step 1. The MTOE authorizes every single person and every single piece of gear in the unit. Step 2. The commander is the one who has to sign for all of it. They are legally and financially responsible. Step 3. The sergeants and other leaders are the ones on the ground, managing that on-hand personnel and equipment every single day. You can see how this creates a direct line of responsibility, all the way from the top of the Army down to the individual soldier in the motor pool. And that brings us to the core conflict, the constant battle that every unit fights. It's the battle of on-hand versus authorized. What you physically have versus what the paperwork, the MTO, says you should have. And closing that gap, well, that's pretty much the definition of readiness. So what happens when your on-hand doesn't equal your authorized? Well, you get some major problems. Let's talk property. If you have a piece of equipment, say a vehicle, that isn't listed on your MTOE, that's unauthorized property. That is a massive headache during any kind of inspection or inventory. What about people? Promotions are tied directly to the MTOE. If the document doesn't have a slot for a staff sergeant with a specific MOS, that's military occupational specialty or job, then you simply cannot promote one of your sergeants into that position. There's no job for them. And of course, the big one is mission readiness. If you don't have the people or the gear that you're authorized to have, how can you possibly do the mission you're supposed to do? And that really leaves us with one final and pretty challenging question to think about. We've established that the MTOE is a unit's legal foundation, but it's also a document that can be slow to change. So what happens when the mission on the ground changes, overnight? What happens when the reality of a conflict moves way faster than the paperwork can keep up? That is the fundamental tension at the heart of managing the force, and it's a challenge that leaders across the Army are dealing with every single day.